Hello, in this video I'm going to look at another key aspect of UK politics, component 1, political parties. I'm going to introduce some of the key elements about political parties, but I'm not in this video going to go into individual parties in any detail. There will be videos coming up in which I will do that. Right, so let's start with the very basics. What is a political party? Well, essentially it's a group of individuals who are seeking to create an organization that will stand in elections and try and win public office. So they're different to pressure groups because they're trying to do that key thing of winning office. They're going to stand in elections. Going into an election, a party will produce what's known as a manifesto. This is a set of promises of what they would do if they were elected. And sometimes, though quite unusually in politics, the occasional party has stuck to one or two of these having been elected. Now, the party that wins is said to have a mandate. This means that they have the power, the authority to carry out their manifesto promises because they have been given the consent of the electorate. So this seems fairly straightforward, but it isn't always, particularly given the nature of different electoral systems, which is again something else I'll look at in future videos. With our particular electoral system, it is very, 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 very unusual for a party to get more than 50% of the vote. So even when we have a party that is said to have had a kind of great electoral victory, like the current Conservative government, they have a majority of 80 seats in the House of Commons. You go, well, wow, they've got a massive mandate. They've been really strongly supported, but they got a few percentage points over 40%. So actually, more people voted for other parties than voted for them. So this idea of consent to carry out your manifesto is maybe a slightly difficult one given different electoral systems. Another important doctrine in the UK is what's known as the Salisbury Doctrine, which says that the House of Lords will not block a bill on its second reading that comes from a manifesto pledge. So if the government says the government of the day said it was going to do something in its manifesto and it tries to do it, the House of Lords should not ultimately try and stop it. So the political parties we are aware of in the country, parties like the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the SNP, Plaid Cymru, the Brexit Party, they stand in elections, they try and win seats in the House of Commons, and through that they try to wield a degree of political party. But there is political power, but there's a whole kind of organisation behind those representatives. So the party is more than just the members of Parliament. So what roles do political parties play in our political system? Well, they offer representation. So the candidates who stand on ultimately the MPs that win, they should represent the views of the membership of their party, but also more widely of their voters. Now, there are different systems or different beliefs about representation and whether they should represent everybody in their constituency or rather than just the people who vote for them. And there sometimes can be conflicting messages to representatives from the party and the party membership as opposed to what is wanted in their particular constituency. Right, parties offer a method for political engagement and participation. They make people aware of political issues. They educate and encourage participation. So people can become party members, they can become party activists. And in this, we get a broad range of people active in politics. They also offer a route for political recruitment. So they recruit the candidates who ultimately become our MPs and our ministers and playing all those important political roles. Now, they tend to not just go straight in there. They tend to work their way up and have some kind of like an apprenticeship politically at lower levels, working their way through the party, representing at different levels before ultimately going into Parliament. Though there are quite a few who have maybe jumped that kind of longer apprenticeship, and we have had periods with much younger representatives in Parliament and people who have been parachuted in as they're seen as rising stars. They also play an important role, political parties, in policy formulation. What will happen is a party will internally discuss and develop a policy before presenting it to the public. So this then means that you should get the public being presented fully thought out policy ideas. And with a political party, they don't just look at it in isolation in terms of something, in terms of one particular area of interest. They tend to, the majority of parties, consider things as part of a whole programme. So whilst a pressure group might only be interested in civil liberties or only interested in the environment, A political party is going to be presenting a manifesto that covers all range of policy areas, and therefore they might be held to account in terms of balancing what they've said they can do against other promises that they've made, and how you're going to pay for that, and that kind of thing. Parties should offer a stable government, and part of this is really kind of imagining a world without them, which is quite a difficult thing to do. But try to imagine the House of Commons with no parties. So you have 650 individually elected MPs who then have got to try and decide on who's going to be in the government, what policies the government's going to have, that have got to try and pass bills. And now parties offer us a kind of a clear groupings within Parliament. They have their own systems, like what's known as the whip system, where they'll get all the people in their party to vote a particular way. They select the people who will be their leadership, who would then form a cabinet, and their leader would become prime minister. So the political world where you don't have parties is a really difficult one to get your head around. So it's hard to imagine a country having a stable government where it didn't have political parties to carry out the job in a representative democracy. Now, things might be different if you use direct democracy. So different types of party. So we have our mainstream party, and the main two are the Conservatives and the Labour Party, and there's also the Liberal Democrats. And those parties will run in all the different constituencies across the country, and they will attempt to form a government. And they will try and address all policy issues. So they won't only talk about certain issues, they will talk about absolutely everything. So definitely we'd have the Conservatives and the Labour Party in this bracket. The Liberal Democrats it varies from period of time, really, because sometimes they're winning large proportions of the vote and having quite a major say, for example, in coalition government. And other times they can become very, very small, and you think, well, maybe they're more of a minority party. So they can form an interesting part of the debate. Now, there are several reasons why they don't necessarily fit into the minority or niche party category. One is you tend to have two major groups in this. You have the nationalist parties, groups like the SNP and Plaid Cymru, that only stand in part of the UK and campaign for their nation or region to gain independence. There's also parties for Cornwall, and there's a party for Yorkshire as well. And so they aren't trying to form the next British government because they're not going to do that. So the SNP being, for example, in recent elections, very, very successful. But the limit on the number of seats that they could ever win is the number of seats in Scotland, because that's the only place where they stand. You also get single issue parties, and we've seen this over the issue of leaving the EU, with UKIP then being followed by the Brexit Party that stood in recent elections. We also have the long-standing Green Party, which focuses on the environment. It does offer a programme with more things, but very, very much focused on that particular issue. I mean, sometimes you get even more niche, even smaller parties that are concerned with a particular issue in their local community. Might be something like a hospital closure. An example of that is the Kidderminster Hospital and Health Concern Party. And you also are going to get a variety of kind of joke parties, and also like the Monterey Red Balloon Party, and also maybe some extreme parties like communist parties or parties of the extreme right, like the BNP. Right. So the parties then operate together in what is known as a party system. So on this slide, what I'm looking at is the variety of party systems that exist in the world. You have the single party system, where there is only one party. So, for example, in Soviet Russia under Stalin, they had elections. You could vote. You just could only vote for someone from the Communist Party. And you have similar things in modern day, like in North Korea, where there is a political party, there is only one. Dominant party system is something slightly different. There can be multiple parties, but one party over a prolonged period of time is just absolutely dominant. It wins all the elections. One of the best examples of this was in Japan, 1955 to 1993. The Liberal Democratic Party in Japan won all the elections. Now, there have actually been points in time when there's been an argument in the UK that's gone, well, that party seems to have become dominant. So, for example, the Conservative Party from 1979 through to 1997, the Labour Party from 97 through to 2010, where for long periods of time, the chances of there being anybody else in power seem very, very slim. We may arguably be entering a similar period now, given the size of the government's majority. But we'll wait and see what happens in terms of any revival of the Labour or Liberal Democrat Party in the next Parliament. The system that the UK is most commonly argued to have is known as the two-party system, where essentially you have two parties compete for power. So although there will be other parties, they have no chance of winning. Now, the absolute clear-cut two-party system is the USA, where unless you're a Democrat or Republican, essentially you have no hope. So they are an absolutely rock-solid two-party system. The UK is often seen as a two-party system, with it just being a direct fight between the Conservative Party and Labour. Now, there was this system was put into, or the idea of this system was the UK system was put into real doubts with the emergence of the Liberal Democrats and the SNP and other groups where they've had a say in power. So most notably when we had the coalition government from 2010, and then we've had in recent years we've had other minor parties who've had a major role in propping up a government, such as the DUP. Now, the other party system which you could argue we have, therefore, is the multi-party system, where there are more than two parties competing for power or able to have a significant impact on power. And this is often seen in systems where countries have a voting system which is proportional, which means that the number of votes cast will directly reflect it in the number of seats that you get. We don't have that, and we will be looking at that in future videos. There's a video that I've done in one of my asides with Alan about the first past the post system, which we do have, which I'm not an enormous fan of. Now, for a good example, this is Italy, and in between 1945 and 1993, they had a series of coalition governments, absolutely part of a multi-party system. Now, in the UK, there does seem to be moments where we have this. So 2010 would be a good example of that. The SNP have a significant impact on politics, you could argue, in terms of winning almost all the seats in Scotland. But we seem to have gone back to more of a direct fight between Conservatives and Labour in recent elections, where they picked up a very high total proportion of the vote between the two of them. So one of the things to think about is, well, which system do we have? Now, this might be a clear-cut one where you go, well, actually, really, there's only ever genuinely two parties competing for power. Since the time of World War II, that has been the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. We have a two-party system. It's not quite as clear-cut as the US, but that's what we have. Or you might argue, well, actually, there's been so many elections in recent years where one of the smaller parties has played a fairly major role. The Liberal Democrats, arguably, though they don't get it necessarily reflected in their seats, they win a reasonable proportion of the vote. The SNP are becoming dominant in Scotland, and therefore we are more of a multi-party system. And we've seen the use of even tiny parties like the DUP in terms of keeping a government in power. You could argue, and at various points people have, that we go through stages of dominant party system. We don't often have, or in recent history, this bit where we flip-flop between one party to the other and back again, which you might expect in a two-party system. We tend to, a party gets in and then is in for a prolonged period of time. So we think of Conservatives 79 through to 97, then we saw Labour 97 through to 2010, and then we've had Conservatives either by themselves or in coalition from 2010. So that we're already at 10 years on that. And that shows no sign of going anywhere or changing in the near future. So an interesting thing for you to think about and try and match what you know about UK politics to the different party systems. Right, another big debate in the area of parties is party funding. Now, traditionally, the Labour Party is funded by trade unions and by membership. So lots of people giving a little bit of money. There have been some wealthy individuals who have supported Labour, and this particularly happened under New Labour with Blair. The Conservative Party is traditionally funded by wealthy individuals and by business. The Lib Dems tend to struggle, and this is one of the reasons why they struggle to compete with the other two parties, because they're nowhere near as well funded. Now, party funding is really controversial. So, do the Labour Party get completely dictated to by the trade unions? Are the Conservative Party serving the interests of these wealthy individuals and business? And there have been scandals, and as I mentioned earlier, the Labour Party started taking kind of wealthy individual contributions as well. One of the most infamous of these was Bernie Ecclestone in 1997, that gave them a £1 million donation. Seemed to have gained a special status for Formula One, where the tobacco advertising ban wasn't going to apply to them. The Labour Party gave him his £1 million back, and he still got what he wanted. There was another scandal in terms of an idea in 2006, and this has happened in many times in British history as well, where the government were accused of taking cash and in exchange for peerages. So what do we do about this corruption and problems that we have with the party funding system? Do we limit the amount individuals can donate? With trade union membership, do we make it opt-in or opt-out? And an awful lot of this has seemed very much like a party political issue. So when the Conservative Party are in power, they change it from opt-out to opt-in to make it so the trade unions get less funding to the Labour Party. When the Labour Party are in power, then they tend to do things like limiting the level of individual donations to prevent the wealthy backers giving loads of money to the Conservative Party. So one of the answers potentially to this is something called state funding. So the parties, rather than going out and seeking money from individuals or institutions or organisations or companies, they would be funded by the state. The arguments in favour of this say it would remove the disparity. So if you're getting a reasonable percentage of the vote, you'll get a reasonable amount of funding. So that would help parties like the Liberal Democrats. You can argue that parties, as we looked at earlier in the video, play an important public role. They play a really important role in our politics, and therefore they deserve some kind of state funding. And ultimately, it would reduce corruption because the parties wouldn't be beholden to organisations, individuals, businesses, things like that. The counter to this is, well, actually, if you're going to get state funding, then we're going to need state regulation. So we'd have our political parties being regulated by the state, which seems politically dangerous, and that would seem to go against some freedom. We'd have to make a decision about who got the funding. And that could lead into some really difficult stuff with taxpayers funding parties they dislike. Or do you give funding to some parties which ideas why the vast majority would consider to be very extreme or dangerous? And it would also stop the parties necessarily having to reflect public views in the same way, because they got their funding anyway, so they don't necessarily have to be reaching out to memberships or reaching out to the wider public to try and see what they genuinely want. So it's a difficult issue, and again, something else for you to make a judgment on, to think about: do you think that parties should be state funded? Right, the last thing that I'm going to look at on this is the political spectrum. Now, different political parties tend to represent different points on the political spectrum. Traditionally, we talk about left and right. I'm going to add a slight extra bit to that in a minute. Left and right wing actually comes from at the time of revolutionary France, when the anti-royalists sat on the left and the royalists sat on the right. So if you look at the diagram that I've put on here, you might see what you might traditionally think of left and right. So to the left, we've got socialism, and on the extreme left, we've got communism. In the middle, we've got liberalism. Then to the moderate right, we've got conservatism, and on the extreme right, we've got fascism. Now, the bit that I think makes actually the political spectrum make a little bit more sense is when you add the up-down axis as well. So you've got at the top you would have authoritarian, and at the bottom we'd have the very extreme of liberal, and the very extreme of liberal would be anarchy, where you don't have state, you don't have government. So the higher up you go, then the stronger the state is. So, for example, a fascist government would be authoritarian and right-wing. Communist Russia would be authoritarian and left-wing. Whilst you can have people who are right-wing and very liberal, often referred to as libertarians, you can have socialists who are very liberal as well. So you get a whole range of different things. Now, there's a range of websites, things like politicalcompass.org, where you can go in and answer questions and find out where you are on that spectrum, which can be quite an interesting thing to do. Right, thank you very much for watching. Hope this has been helpful to you and give you a good understanding of what a political party is and some of the key debates surrounding them. Don't forget to like, to comment and subscribe, and I will hopefully see you all again soon in some more of my politics or some of my history videos, which you can find on my channel, Alan History Nerd. Right, thank you very much.